You've been listening to Border Free Radio here at KSQD Santa Cruz. Stay tuned for Be Bold America coming up next.
The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters. KSQD thanks attorney Ned Hearn for supporting this program. Ned Hearn specializes in intellectual property and business law with a focus on entertainment, internet, and computer software business and their convergence, intersecting content, media, and technology in the digital environment. More info at www.internetmedialaw.com. Thank you, Ned Hearn, for supporting KSQD 90.7 FM.
Hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm your host, Jill Cody. Be Bold America is a live, bi-weekly talk show for those who are motivated to step out with the bold actions necessary to reunite this country and reclaim our democracy. Be Bold America is for those who want to understand the unique challenges ahead and who are curious to learn what they can keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to reclaim our democratic republic. Our future depends on it. Our program today is about the national popular vote and swing left. How will the Electoral College be made irrelevant, or should it be? The National Popular Vote Bill would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes across all 50 states and the District of Columbia. It already has been enacted in law in 16 jurisdictions with 196 votes. The bill will go into effect when enacted by states with an additional 74 electoral votes. Also, what is Swing Left Santa Cruz doing? What are they doing to focus on the 12 super states that could flip the White House, the Senate, and roll back Republic gerrymandering? Swing Left Santa Cruz organized countless actions towards flipping the House in 2018, and they flipped 7 seats in California. How will the Santa Cruz chapter build on its 2018 success? We have big things to do. Before I introduce Scott Drexel from the National Popular Vote, I'd like to welcome our KSQD in-studio community member, Renee Block. Renee will join me in discussing the National Popular Vote with Scott and will share with us what the Santa Cruz chapter of Swing Left is up to. Renee organized the Santa Cruz chapter after the 2016 presidential election, and the chapter has experienced significant success in just 3 short years. They organized 100 people to canvass the Congressional District 10 and organized 35 people to register voters in Arizona. Plans for the 2020 election are in full swing. Renee was a marathon runner and a vocational rehabilitation counselor for 25 years. And I bet being a marathon runner really gives you the idea of what it's going to take to swing left. Welcome, Renee.
It helps to go the distance. Thank you.
It does. I bet you want people to get out and vote this coming Tuesday, too.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, yeah, we've been working on that as well.
Good. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Our bold and special call-in expert today is Scott Drexel. Scott is here today representing the National Popular Vote. He is also a longtime advisor to some of the country's most active donors, activists, and business leaders. Scott serves on finance committees for several national Democratic committees and has been active in the campaigns of numerous candidates. Scott has worked in over 30 states on behalf of the National Popular Vote. Scott lives in Tiburon, right here in California, with his wife and daughter. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us today, Scott.
Well, thank you very much, Jill. And Renee, hello to a fellow distance runner. I ran cross country at Berkeley, so if we ever see each other on the road, I'll be sure to give you a wave.
You both have that long distance commitment mentality. That's great.
There's some defect, I think.
So to just dive right in, can you tell us about the National Popular Vote, what your goals are?
Sure. I think what's often helpful in discussing National Popular Vote before we talk about what it is to talk about what it isn't.
Oh, good.
National Popular Vote is not about abolishing the Electoral College or finding some way to get around the Electoral College. It's not about amending the Constitution. Very specifically, what National Popular Vote does is it utilizes the power that the founders granted to the states in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, that states were given plenary authority to determine how their electoral votes were awarded. The current system that most people are familiar with today, that is law in 48 of 50 states, is the winner-take-all system, where by a candidate wins 50% of a state's votes plus one, and they receive all of that state's electoral votes. That did not come into effect until about the 1830s. So the founders by that point were long deceased. The winner-take-all system wasn't discussed at the Constitutional Convention. It was never voted on. And again, it really was part of sort of pre-Civil War kind of jockeying for political power, that it actually came into prevalent use. It was the 1890s before all 50 states use it. 2 states today, Maine and Nebraska, actually divide their electoral votes by congressional district. President Obama won an electoral vote out of Omaha, Nebraska in 2012. President Trump won an electoral vote out of Maine in 2016. That is problematic for a whole different set of reasons, from gerrymandering and on, but it sort of serves to demonstrate this is purely a matter of state law. So what National Popular Vote is, and I'll do my best not to repeat what you already said, Jill, is states really coming together and using that constitutional power to agree upon how they are going to award their electoral votes in a way that actually reflects the popular vote of the people in all 50 states, rather than this highly fragmented scheme that we have now that ultimately leaves 40 to 45 states out of the national conversation every 4 years.
So one of the questions I received before the show was how could it actually work when the Electoral College is provided for in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution?
Sure. So the Electoral College is provided for, but what isn't is how the Electoral College functions. So the method of actually awarding those electors was left entirely to the states because the founders couldn't agree on it. I mean, I think if we're going back to the Federalist Papers and the founding documents of our country, what became clear is that the founders were trying to strike a balance so that no individual state or small collection of states could exercise outside influence over the national policy debate, whether that was selecting a president or enacting legislation, etc. What we have now is exactly what the founders were trying to prevent, which is 4 to 5 to 7 swing states that are actually determining who the president of the United States is, purely because the remaining states are solidly blue or solidly red, to the extent that it doesn't make sense for a presidential campaign, Democratic or Republican, to go campaign there, because they're either so far ahead or so hopelessly behind that no expenditure of time or resources will change that outcome. This has been litigated many times over the course of American history, and the courts have held really firmly to this constitutional power, that authorization in the Constitution to state legislatures is plenary. It's actually one of the most clearly enumerated powers in the U.S. Constitution. This isn't sort of lumped into the 10th Amendment. What constitutional powers are not designated for the federal government or left to the states. This is a very, very specific statement in the Constitution that says this is a function of state legislatures. I think the Electoral College doesn't work today the way that the founders had intended. And if we're being quite honest about the way the Electoral College was set up, it was supposed to be a deliberative body where a small group of people were to come together and actually debate and decide where those electoral votes would be awarded on a state-by-state basis. It ceased to function that way basically as soon as George Washington was no longer on the ballot. And so I think what we're looking at now is what room does the Constitution give us to change the way we award those electors based on the state, Republican system of government, small r, this idea that our elected representatives can legislate from the bottom up to determine what works best for our country. And I think a system in which one person, one vote, the person with the most votes reigns, that is always going to be superior to a system in which voters in certain geographical regions are infinitely more powerful and more influential in the process than their countrymen.
Renee?
Yes. Hi, Scott. I really respect your willingness to try to take this on, which is a very, very difficult endeavor.
Thank you.
That I can see. But there are some barriers, and I'd like to ask a little bit about those.
Certainly.
One of the things is the constitutionality of the whole endeavor, which is essentially to be an agreement between the states, right, to get 270 electoral votes, to have an agreement to count votes in this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I understand it, the Constitution doesn't. The only way that can be allowed is with congressional approval. Is that right?
So it's a very interesting point. So. Boy, you guys did your homework.
We did.
That is a great question. So, the reigning Supreme Court precedent can be found in a case called U.S. Steel versus the Multi-State Tax Commission. So, the idea of an interstate compact, which is what National Popular Vote is, it is an agreement between states, a contract. But it has a triggering moment where for in our case, it's 270 electoral votes. Once states pass the law, nothing happens until you hit that point where states representing 270 electoral votes opt in. When that 270 electoral vote moment is reached, the agreement goes into effect. The idea of an interstate compact is not terribly novel. Your average state is in about 40 different interstate compacts. That ranges from driver's license compacts that allows you to drive from California to Nevada or Nevada to Arizona, and your driver's license will be authorized. That is a result of states entering into interstate compacts. Child sex offender registries, so that states can share data between law enforcement agencies. Powerball, the Mississippi River Compact. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of different compacts that exist in today's state law. What the U.S. Steel versus the Multi-State Tax Commission said was congressional consent is only required where federal supremacy is threatened. So let me give an example of that. The Great Lakes Compact that includes not only Michigan and Wisconsin, but also Canadian provinces, does touch on federal powers. You're not only talking about interstate commerce at that point, you're talking about international commerce, and that is very much a federal power. So the Great Lakes Compact required congressional consent. National Popular Vote is simply states coming together to determine and to agree upon a manner of awarding the electors and thereby exercising a power that they already have. So no federal power is being threatened. It's backed up by about 200 years of Supreme Court and lower court precedent, and really most recently strengthened, quite frankly, by more conservative courts. The Rehnquist Court, I think, really in a push to bolster states' rights movements and states' powers, reaffirmed that in saying, look, states may enter into agreements with one another, and the federal government should take a very light approach in determining whether or not they even should weigh in. And the determining factor is whether a federal power is being threatened. And in this case, it simply isn't.
You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM, Many Voices, One Station. Listen worldwide online at ksqd.org. Exploring Santa Cruz tomorrow, Monday, March 2nd, 3:30 p.m. Coming up on Exploring Santa Cruz is what is the problem with predatory lending? Where to turn when you need money and don't have access? Join hosts Matilda Rand and Brando Sentian from Santa Cruz Community Ventures in a discussion on predatory lending practices, how to personally avoid it, and what measures are being taken to stop it. That's Monday, tomorrow, March 2nd from 3:30 to 4 p.m. on KSQD 90.7 FM and ksqd.org. Today we're speaking with Scott Drexel from the National Popular Vote, and in the studio with me is Renee Block, head of the Santa Cruz chapter of Swing Left. I'm your host, Jill Cody. Now, Scott, what about it being challenged in court, the constitutionality of this interstate compact? Don't you think it would be challenged and go up to the Supreme Court?
I certainly think it will. Up until fairly recently, opponents of National Popular Vote would typically concede that National Popular Vote is constitutional. There have been multiple times where states have sued one another, claiming that their method of awarding electors somehow disenfranchises the voters in other states. The Supreme Court has routinely refused to even hear those cases because, again, this is a plenary authority of states. Nonetheless, it will be challenged in court, and I don't doubt that. There are two things that are important to remember here. Number one, and actually going back to Renee's question about congressional consent, the past precedent has held that congressional consent, to the extent it is required, can be sought prior to, during, or after an interstate compact has actually been completed and triggered. So we're pressing forward with the knowledge that 16 different jurisdictions, 15 states and the District of Columbia, have had legislatures that have vigorously debated this, that have raised some of the same questions that you have raised today, and have determined this is the best path for their state and for their citizenry. And, a handful of more states will do that, and we'll eventually reach that 270 electoral vote moment. I get this question a lot in the sense that, the Supreme Court in particular has changed significantly in the last half a dozen years. I think if you're pursuing change in this country, there is always the chance that a court will completely reverse course and break with hundreds of years of precedent to rule against what you're doing. But I think it's important to not allow that to deter people from the work that needs to be done to make our democracy better.
Sure.
You look at the history, and you look at the legal arguments, and you make the best good faith argument that you can. I look at things like the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. There would have been plenty of reason to look at that and say, well, this is obviously going to run into hurdles in the federal courts. So Virginia just shouldn't pass the Equal Rights Amendment. But instead, Virginia this year, as we know, pressed forward, and they passed it, and they'll go to the federal courts, and they'll make their best faith argument. And I think that's what we're doing. History is on our side. The law currently is on our side. Precedent is on our side. And to date, 16 American jurisdictions are on our side. And I think if we get to a point where states representing 270 electoral votes say we want to change, and the federal court decides that it wants to step in and overturn that, that's a big statement. And I think the courts generally shied away from that in the past. I hope that continues to be the case. But I think, again, the entire history of this issue is behind us, and we'll continue pressing forward until there is a reason not to.
Renee?
Yes. So in terms of the future prospects for state legislature approvals, where are we with that? Are there some possible flips, so to speak, or passages?
Oh, yes. In the past, there's been a national... Let me just say, we started in 2006. And at the time, there were plenty of people saying this must be some anti-Bush thing. Now there are still people who say this must be some anti-Trump thing, which, if it was, then we were clairvoyant 10 years earlier than Trump was elected. But, I think the political landscape has changed in a way that's somewhat unfortunate. Prior to 2016, we had really reached this point where I think we were far enough from 2000 that Republican state legislators, Republican, sort of public interest groups would really evaluate the issue
on the merits.
We typically see 30, 40, 50% of a Republican caucus vote for the bill. When we passed the state of New York, the Senate was under Republican control. It passed 52-4. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans voted against it. The Oklahoma Senate passed it. The Arizona House passed it. In the Georgia Senate, I think a majority of the Republican caucus there sponsored our bill. What happened, in 2016, I think in a lot of ways forced, everyone to kind of run back into their partisan corners. And it doesn't need to be that way. The last 2, what we call wrong way elections in 2000 and 2016 happened to go for a Republican president. But in 2004, if you just flipped about 60,000 votes in the state of Ohio, John Kerry would have become the president of the United States, and he would have lost the popular vote by a larger margin than Donald Trump did. So this is an issue that cuts both ways, and hopefully we'll get back to a point where the issue isn't so politicized. But right now, the states that tend to be the ones that are most likely to enact it are ones that have Democratic leadership.
Right, which is what we're working on, yes. Which is one of our main goals.
That leadership. Right.
So, Scott, what do your opponents say?
There's really kind of a sort of recurring FAQ that comes up, and one that I won't get into since we just covered it pretty, I think, in depth is the constitutionality issue. That much we're standing on very solid, long-term ground. Another is that this is somehow inconsistent with what the founders envisioned. Well, when in 1787. In the first census in 1790, the urban-rural divide in this country was 95% rural and 5% urban. So the founders weren't trying to prevent urban areas from overrunning rural areas. They weren't trying to make sure that small states were able to keep pace with big states. I think the United States Senate took very, very good care of that question. Really, what they were trying to do was prevent a system where, again, some states were able to exercise undue influence over others. What the founders couldn't envision at the time was man, flying via steel tube from a hyper-targeted area in Van Meter, Iowa, to Lima, Ohio, to Tallahassee, Florida, and ignoring, 2/3 of the American population in between. So, the idea that this was inconsistent with what the founders really intended, I think, it sort of runs counter to the fact that most of them weren't alive by the time that we ended up with the system we have today. There are questions about whether large metropolitan areas are as big and necessarily as blue as people think they are. Jill, you and I had spoken earlier in the week about maps that have circulated where somebody says, well, this if you look at Los Angeles, it's bigger than X number of states. If you look at the way this population in this country is divided, 1/6 of the population lives in urban areas. That's census-designated urban areas. 1/6 of this country lives in rural areas. The urban areas are about 60-40 Democrat. The rural areas are about 60-40 Republican. And the rest of this country, 2/3, lives in the suburbs and exurbs, which are almost perfectly divided 50-50 Democrat and Republican. And if you look at sort of where these cities are, I mean, we'll use our example here in California, they're not big enough or blue enough to guarantee a Democrat. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger did not become governor of California because he was overwhelmingly popular in Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, and Sacramento. It's because he competed there, but, he also happened to carry a lot of suburbs and rural areas. And that's true in virtually every state. So I think, and even if you look at how presidential campaigns run in the battleground states now, they don't just go, let's take, Pennsylvania, for example. They're not just spending all of their time in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. They go everywhere because every vote is equal in Pennsylvania. So when we move to a national popular vote system, what it does is it basically turns the country and the presidential election into one big governor's race. You're not going to spend all your time in these urban areas, but you're not going to ignore them either. You are going to go everywhere and campaign for every vote because a vote in, downtown Los Angeles matters just as much as a vote in Gilroy. And I think that ultimately is going to be better for our country. So those are the most common things. But it really increasingly has come down to what I think is a growing anxiety in rural areas that somehow urban areas are running roughshod over their interests. And the numbers just don't support that, especially on a national level.
Right. I'm very interested in also the Supreme Court case that's coming up in June about electors being able to vote a different way from the voters. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, Baca v. Hickenlooper.
Right. Do you have, just some information about that? That's very, quite an interesting thing that the electors can actually, it's choices to be made by the Supreme Court as to whether or not electors can do that. Or do you have...
So what Baca v. Hickenlooper deals with is this idea of a faithless elector. In 2016, there were 10 people who were in states that were one by one candidate, but the electors for that particular candidate opted not to vote for that particular candidate. In Colorado, in particular, there were laws that required the electors to vote in a way that was consistent with what the way the state vote went. So ultimately, it doesn't affect national popular vote because, remember, when we vote for president, and this is maybe getting a bit arcane, we are not voting for an individual. We are voting for a slate of electors that are associated with that individual. So, in Oregon, for example, they had 7 electoral votes. If Donald Trump had won Oregon, the 7 electors that were associated with Donald Trump would have been the slate that had shown up to Salem and cast their vote for Donald Trump. The 7 electors who were associated with Hillary Clinton's campaign, had Hillary won, which she did, they were the ones that showed up in Salem that day. So national popular vote does not deal with how those electors are nominated, only with which slate of electors are set.
But the state agreement, if this takes effect, let's say the proposal that you're pursuing, then it would force the electors to vote differently, than what the voters wanted, essentially, in a particular state. Isn't that right?
Keep in mind, no. So you would never have a situation where you would have an elector who is standing there, on the day the Electoral College met, forced to vote in a way that was inconsistent with their personal values or with who they were sent there to.
Well, then how do you adjust the votes then so that if there's more, how do you adjust it?
Yeah, So let me give you the case of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is probably the best case. Pennsylvania's state law allows the nominated campaigns for each party to select who those electors are. So when after the election has taken place, the electors who go and actually vote at the meeting of the Electoral College have been hand-selected by the Trump campaign in 2016. Those people are more than happy to cast their vote for Donald Trump. Had Hillary Clinton won that state, every single one of those electors would have been more than happy to cast their vote for Hillary Clinton. Either way, under a national popular vote, and let me just say for a moment, our current system is far, far more at risk of an entire national result being thrown off as a result of faithless electors. Because right now, faithless electors in the right place, if you have a very closely divided election, a single elector can actually throw that off if they happen to be in a state where they're not required to vote in a certain way. So under the national popular vote, you're just talking about changing the way those electoral votes are determined. The way the electors are actually chosen is a matter of a different set of state law. But again, under the current system, you're more at risk of those electoral votes going haywire and actually throwing off the national election than you would be in a sense, in a system where the person who gets the most votes in all 50 states is guaranteed a block of 270 electoral votes. But again, that dynamic exists in the current system and is not really affected either way by national popular vote.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. And we're speaking with Renee Block from Santa Cruz Swing Left and Scott Drexel from the National Popular Vote. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, your host for Progressive Talk on K-Squid 90.7 FM, community radio for the Central Coast, 4 p.m. weekdays. KSQD is a vital media resource for listeners in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties and worldwide on the web. Please help support this station by making a contribution to keep the station thriving. Go to ksqd.org and give what you can to help keep shows like mine coming to you daily at 90.7 FM. You know, with 6 large corporations owning most of the media, it's essential that listeners support grassroots, locally run radio stations like KSQD. Community radio is responsive to its listeners and isn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Please join me, Tom Hartman, in supporting K-Squid 90.7 FM, community radio for the Central Coast, by making your pledge today online at ksqd.org. That's 90.7 FM. K-Squid. Catch me right here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you, and tag You're It.
Now, back to our bold and impressive guests. Scott, I still need to wrap my head around something, and that is that still, how would rural states not feel electorally disenfranchised?
Sure.
With people in small states, why would they even bother to vote for the office of presidency?
Well, I guess I would ask you why they would vote today. So if you take the 10 most rural states in this country, none of them are battleground states. So let's take a state like Wyoming, which is about as rural as a state gets. Wyoming is so overwhelmingly Republican that if you're, finishing on the ranch for the day and you can either go drive a very long distance to the polling location or you can call it a day, the truth is the presidential election is going to go, it's predetermined. It's pretty much baked in that Wyoming is going to go for the Republican candidate. So I would say right now, a rural voter is highly disenfranchised. If we look at the 2020 election, there are really 4 states that we're zeroing in on as the decisive battleground states for the cycle. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Florida. We can argue maybe Minnesota sneaks in a bad year for Democrats. Maybe Arizona sneaks in in a good year for Democrats. But really, those are the 4. And typically, what we've seen is that rural states are some of the most overlooked states under the current system. In a national popular vote, every vote is equal. Let me go back to that example of a race for governor. In the state of California, a vote in Fresno, a vote in Gilroy, a vote in Santa Cruz matters just as much as a vote in downtown San Francisco. Every vote matters no matter where it comes from. Right now, a rural vote in rural Florida and a rural vote in rural Wisconsin matters infinitely more than an urban vote in New York City or an urban vote in Austin, Texas, or an urban vote in Montpelier, Vermont. So really, we're seeing the effects now of a system that currently disenfranchises rural voters. And I think, a lot of us heard in high school civics classes that the idea of the Electoral College was really, rooted in sort of preserving the influence of rural voters. Well, how is that working for us? Political power really comes from being the decisive vote or the decisive voice on an issue. That's why, in great fights in the Senate and great fights over, initiatives come down to those swing voters in the middle. And unfortunately, we've ended up in a system where presidential candidates bargain to win the votes of states that are narrowly divided enough that they can actually, through an expenditure of time and resources, win those states. But a Democratic candidate is never going to go to a rural state like Wyoming or a rural state like North Dakota, South Dakota, because they're too far behind. And a Republican president isn't going to go there either because they're too far ahead. So I think, the idea that the current system somehow benefits the rural areas of America is flawed on its face. And the only way you correct that is to make every vote equal, no matter where it comes from.
Well, before we swing over to swing left and talk a little bit about the Santa Cruz chapter here, if people have more questions, and what's the website? How can they get in touch with the National Popular Vote to learn more?
Sure. It's nationalpopularvote.com, and as I said, we passed here in California in addition to 15 other jurisdictions. I think the only other point, if I could, Jill,
of course,
I think it's really important to understand that, especially in this current environment, we're so caught up in the political implications of any movement that we make, to keep this country moving forward. When I look at presidential campaigns spending, upwards of 70% of their time in just 5-6 battleground states, that's a symptom of the deeper disease. If you live in a non-battleground state compared to a battleground state, we receive 92 cents on the dollar in White House-controlled block grant spending. Battleground states are twice as likely to receive federal disaster declarations. They're more likely to receive enforcement exemptions on No Child Left Behind, Superfund, a number of other issues. It pays to be a battleground state. We look at the way presidential campaigns develop their policy, and we have free trade presidents like George W. Bush pitching steel tariffs in Ohio, and Medicare Part D as small government Republicans because it's popular among seniors in Florida. So what the current system has done is it's really morphed policy, and I think that's the biggest underlying issue that we have to understand. It's that it's not this superficial political who gains, who loses. It's really how does this change the way we have our national debates? So I hope, especially as we hopefully emerge from a hyper-partisan moment in our national polity, we can really look at what is best for us on a small d democratic scale and really understand how the distortive effects that have emanated from the way we do things currently.
Thank you, Scott. I know you're going to stay with us because in the last quarter hour, I want to cover Keep, Stop, Starts with both of you. But
sure.
Renee, tell us about the Swing Left Santa Cruz chapter.
So we're we started out in February 2017, and our goal at that point was to flip the House, and we went out to District 10 and District 21 in Tracy, Modesto, Coalinga, and then this effort also went on in Southern California, and ultimately we were able to flip the House by canvassing, phone calling, texting, and the whole effort. From Santa Cruz alone, we had 100 people go in September 2018, and we had close to that in other months. So it was really a tremendous effort. There was a million voter contacts in District 10 to flip that, and they were just barely flipped. District 21 by 800 votes, and then District 10 by about 2%. So that's helped a lot our current situation to have House at least some check on the administration. So at this point, now we're working on flipping the Senate, the White House, and the state legislatures, and of course the state legislatures, that'll be very helpful for the topic that you've been talking about, but it's also helpful for so many other issues, for health care, for climate change, you name it. It's essential for the survival of our country. So we're hoping to flip 3 to 4 Senate seats minimum, and then obviously the White House, and then there's about 3 to 4 state legislatures. And so Arizona is the closest for us, and we've been there already 4 times in the last 5 months, and we had 35 of us go down to Arizona and do voter registration at the colleges. The first week of colleges, we went to 12 to 14 different community colleges, and then 3 university campuses, and then registered 1,200 Democrats and a few Republicans, but very few, because we had a shield on, so to speak, with just buttons and T-shirts and like that, where we were discouraged.
You're obvious that you were a Democratic effort.
Right. So, and these are mostly also early voters, so we'll have a good chance of getting them out to vote in November.
You talk about the 12 super states. Tell us more about that.
Yes, well, most of them are actually flippable in all those 3 ways. So I don't know if I can remember them off, but most, like Arizona, Michigan, Florida, North Carolina, Texas. So these are all states that are going to where it's possible to flip the House. Flip the Senate and the White House. So we were within 2 to 3 points. In Arizona, Trump won by 3 points, and in the Senate, well, there's an appointed person there, and she actually lost, a Republican, and she lost last time. So there's a good opportunity to win that election.
So how large is the chapter in Santa Cruz?
It's hard to how you measure it, but we're doing great, and we have letter writings, to all these states. We're going to get nationally 2 million letters out to these swing states to get them out to vote in November. So we have full house for every gathering. So about 30. We go to different houses, and it's an enjoyable experience. We have whatever. Have a little something to eat, and people talk and enjoy and commiserate and talk politics. But we get usually out 600 to 800 letters out, and most of them are targeted towards October. Although some of them we've been also doing for special elections. For instance, we did some for tomorrow. There's 3 special elections
for Tuesday
in Texas. Some House seats, and then we've also done some voter registration by mail in the past. We probably won't be continuing that, but that's also been a good effort. And there are phone banks that we've been doing for various efforts. Texting like infrequent environmental voters in Arizona and Massachusetts, and getting them out to vote. So that we work on various niches.
So it seems to me that if you like to travel, you can do that. You can go to Arizona and the other areas of the California. But also, if you just want to work from home or find a community of like-minded people,
the easiest things is the letter writing and the postcarding. We're also doing to District 21. That's really. It's only a couple of hours, and it's like a party, so to speak, because you're talking to people and you can enjoy the environment. And
wherever we can find some joy right now is really good. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen worldwide, online at ksqd.org. Tune in right after Be Bold America to State of Mind, hosted by Santa Cruz licensed psychotherapist Deborah Sloss. This month, Deborah welcomes biomedical writer Evelyn Strauss and psychotherapist Janine Willis, or it's Jean Willis, I'm not quite sure, to talk about recovery from eating disorders, specifically anorexia nervosa. Evelyn shares how she worked her way out of the physical and psychological manifestations of anorexia through a self-created and unconventional path. By facing her fear of being fat, she made lasting peace with food and her body. Jean, a psychotherapist who specializes in eating disorders, helps us learn about the types and prevalences of these conditions, dispels commonly held myths, describes various treatments, and shares resources available to support recovery. Join them for an understanding and seeds of possibility on State of Mind, just right after this show, Sunday at 6 p.m., here on KSQD 90.7 FM and ksqd.org. Our topic is National Popular Vote and Swing Left. I'm your host, Jill Cody. We're speaking with Scott Drexel, representing the National Popular Vote, and with the head of the Santa Cruz chapter of Swing Left, Renee Block. Now, this part of the program, I do like to talk about what the listener can keep doing, stop doing, and start doing. Because one of the common statements that I hear from people is that, well, I know this is an issue, I know this is a problem, but what can I do? People feel overwhelmed. They don't know what as an individual they can do. So, Scott, when it comes to the National Popular Vote, what can listeners keep doing and stop doing and start doing?
Sure. By the way, this is a great thing. This should be on every single show that discusses public policy.
Thank you.
To do keep, start, stop. It's great. So keep doing. In our polling, roughly 72% of Americans favor a system in which the candidate with the most votes becomes president. And they write their legislators, regardless of whether the state has passed national popular vote, has no chance of passing national popular vote, or is critical to national popular vote. So I think really what we've seen, we were a very grass-tops organization when we first got started in the early, 2006 to 2010, 11, in convincing state legislators. Really, in the last, I would say, 10 years, this has become such an important, grassroots has become such an important component of what we're doing. And I think in every issue, constituents underestimate how powerful contacting their legislators is. We've won votes that way. We've lost votes that way. Being loud and being present and being communicative with your state legislators is critical. So I think that's the thing to keep doing. To start doing. Well, let me take stock if I could before start. I think the most important thing to talk about in talking about national popular vote is that we stop framing it as an end run around the Constitution or as an abolish the Electoral College movement. The idea that we are doing something that is inconsistent with the Constitution or with the way that the founders intended the process to function is quite simply false. So I think very early in the year, Elizabeth Warren got up on stage in Mississippi and said we should abolish the Electoral College. And it's helpful in the sense that we're all working toward the same end, a national popular vote election. What's really important is that we understand that we don't have to abolish the Electoral College. The framers gave us the tools to change the way we elect the president today. And so I think the stop is really, let's frame the argument in the way that's most constitutionally appropriate, which is let's use the structures that are available to us today to achieve our outcome. To start, national popular vote is a nonpartisan group. I won't hide my personal leanings. I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I've worked for many Democratic campaigns and democracy issues. I think as a party, as a progressive movement, we need to make it orthodoxy that one person, one vote is fundamental to who we are. I think one of the most distressing things that I've come across is this idea that land has a vote, that, 5 people living on top of each other in an apartment building in, downtown Los Angeles or San Francisco matter in some way less than someone who lives out on a wide open ranch. Every person matters. Every person's vote matters. And I think we as a progressive movement, and I would make this argument to a conservative, every vote should be equal. And so I think that the start is really to make this party orthodoxy. Anything that does not conform to the idea that every person and every vote matters should be anathema to us. We should rally behind enhancing the vote of every individual to the point that we are all equal.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. Well, Renee?
Yes, thank you. So we are in a critical time, to say the least, and I know everyone's been busy, and we have this election coming up tomorrow. But I think at that
Tuesday,
tomorrow, if you want to,
yeah.
and we're everyone, it's time to really evaluate what can really be done, more than just fretting about it and get real. And we need everybody on board. It's a real serious situation, and every little bit helps. So many elections have been just won by just a few hundred votes. And we, for instance, we worked in Virginia, and that was just one. That was by one vote, in the state legislature in 2017. The whole state legislature was determined actually by a flip of the coin. In 2017. So that was control of the whole state, and so every single vote counts. And what we're doing is focusing on where the votes really matter. And I know it's the current system, and we just got to work with the current system. We want to change the system, like we've been talking about, but that's a longer term effort, and we've got to turn things around this year. And if we only get the presidency and not the Senate, or vice versa, it's going to be a pretty sad situation, because it's a very intransient situation. So
winning matters, right, Renee?
What's that?
I said winning matters.
Winning matters, big time. We learned that, and we're going to completely lose if we lose this time, and it's looking very, very close, and it's going to be a big battle. So people have to reflect what they're capable of, what kind of time they have, But if you can only do 2 hours a month, that's great. If you can do 8 hours a month, that's better yet. The canvassing is the most effective thing people can do, but I know that's the most labor intensive. But the door-to-door canvassing. But if you've never done that before, try the letter writing and the postcarding. And we have texting. That's a real enjoyable experience too. And people share their experiences. It's interactive. We get responses back by text, and then follow up and turn people around to register to vote, or to actually vote, or persuasion, depending on where we are in the election cycle.
So what I'm hearing is, for Swing Left and for listeners in Santa Cruz, is if you're voting and you're active, is to keep doing that, because it really matters. If you don't think your vote matters, stop thinking that way, because every vote does matter. And there have been so many powerful forces in this country telling us for decades that your vote doesn't matter. One vote, no big deal. You don't have to take off work. And what would motivate people to say that? They don't want the power that you hold in your pen, or your feet when you walk into a precinct to vote. So we need to turn around the idea that votes don't matter. So if you think that way, stop thinking that way, and then start would be finding out where you can squeeze out more time and join Swing Left. You have a website, right?
Absolutely, yes. SwingLeftSantaCruz.org. We have the full list of items. We have a lot going on in March and April and May and June. We're going to Arizona again to do canvassing there, which is helpful for all our goals: the Senate, the White House, and the state legislature. We're going to those areas where it's going to actually make a difference, and we're going to flip those 3 seats in both the state House and the state Senate. And locally, of course, we're doing lots of letter writing in fun houses, and it's an enjoyable thing to do.
Well, this is also
to participate, to be a citizen.
It's important, because one of we've talked about in the past is people get in depression. They feel depressed about what's going on.
So many people really feel good after these actions.
Build community.
And the work we're doing is going to help whoever the nominees are. Whoever the nominee is for president, whoever the nominee is for, it's good. It's helping that overall effort. So even if there's not a nominee yet, what we're doing is gonna turn us around. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Scott, just
Jill,
30 seconds. Yeah, 30 seconons.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to give Renee a plug. The work that groups like Swing Left have done, and I especially love what they've done on the local level and legislative level. I have spent every single week since January 1st in Richmond, Virginia.
So
If not for the work of groups like Swing Left and understanding where we can put our energy and have the greatest output for it, we wouldn't see things like the ERA, massive steps forward on gun safety, and progress on issues like the one I'm most interested in, national popular vote. So I'm a big fan of the work that Swing Left.
How nice. Well, I want to thank Be Bold America's program engineer, Emily Dunham, for sure, taking control here of the all those. What are those things called? The board. And give another big thank you to our two bold guests, Scott Drexel and Renee Block. Thank you to both of you. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thanks for inviting.
Thank you, Jill.
Next on Be Bold America, we will be discussing Is the Constitution in Crisis? By talking with constitutional attorney Michelle Welsh. She's a Monterey resident and an attorney and very active in the ACLU. She'll talk to us about our Constitution. Is it strenuously being tested? Don't miss it on Sunday, March 15th at 5 p.m. If you missed any of the following programs, you can find them on KSQD's archives. You're listening to KSQD Santa Cruz, Many Voices, One Station. Stay tuned for State of Mind with Deborah Sloss. My name is Jill Cody, and thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.